So another year passes by us so fast, and with it comes a lot of fantastic horror games. From indie survival horror games inspired by classic Resident Evil to long-awaited sequels of our favorite horror franchises. 2025 was another great year for fans of horror games. So on this episode of Nerd Space Games, as we do every year on this channel, I'll be taking a look at all of the horror games I personally played this year and giving you guys the top 10 best horror games of 2025. And honestly speaking, I think I played a lot more new horror games this year than I've ever played. So yeah, I feel strongly about this list. Still, I'd love to hear about your favorite horror games, so be sure to hit up the comments and let me know what your favorite horror game is in 2025. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more survival horror content and check out the official Nerd Space Game shop, which features custom-made artwork by the talented Demento Artworks. Right now we have the Chris Boulder Punching Asshole collection available, but I have future designs in the works that feature Leon, Wesker, and Jill, so definitely check out the store to see if anything catches your attention. Link to the shop is down below in the description of today's video. Anyway, my name is Ruben with Nerd Space Games, and here are my top 10 best horror games of 2025. Number 10, Dead of Darkness. This indie survival horror game is easily the most underrated entry on today's list, as a lot of people forgot about it since it came out at the start of 2025. If you're a fan of top-down survival horror games, especially ones that are heavily inspired by classic Resident Evil, then I think you'll really like this one. Dead of Darkness has a lot of content in it, with multiple locations on a creature-filled island. Most notably, you have zombies of course, but you also have all sorts of monsters including massive bosses and insta-kill spider-like creatures. Yeah, those guys are a massive pain in the ass, just saying. The gameplay is similar to old school Resident Evil, as you'll find yourself looking for key items, backtracking a lot, and solving puzzles while using your limited resources to fight off tons and tons of monsters. Each boss fight feels unique, and the setting of the game is honestly one of the best of the year, as it allows you to explore multiple areas, including a mansion, hospital, and even underground tunnels. The gameplay, while mostly taking inspiration from old school survival horror, uses 2D pixel animation and gives off an arcade action horror vibe, and it's one of the more unique games of this genre that I've ever played. Number 9, Little Nightmares 3. Little Nightmares 3 might not be better than the first two games of the series, but it's still a really fun horror game, and unlike its predecessors, you can enjoy the entire story of Little Nightmares 3 with a friend this time. Also, unlike the first two games, Little Nightmares 3 is its own standalone story set in the same universe as the first two games of the series. As you would expect from a horror puzzle platformer, most of the gameplay involves you exploring dark and gloomy environments with some of the most disturbing enemy types trying to capture you. When it comes to this game, I would argue that some of the set pieces are much more immersive than some of the locations in previous games, like the Carnival chapter easily being one of my favorite in the game. Also, as someone that's terrified of spiders, one of the main enemies in this game absolutely skeeves me the hell out. A new feature in Little Nightmares 3 is the fact that both playable characters each have their own unique ability. Lo uses a bow to take out certain enemies from a distance or shoot down useful objects, while Alone wields a massive wrench used to finish off down enemies and break through walls. As you would expect from the premise of the game, Little Nightmares 3 is best when you play it with a friend, and thankfully, you only need to own one copy of the game, as Little Nightmares 3 allows friends of yours to use a friend pass and play the game with you without buying a second copy of it. And yeah, one of the best parts about this game is the co-op feature, and quite honestly, it's a big reason why I enjoyed this game so much, because I got to appreciate it with my wife. Number 8, Silent Hill F. I would be lying if I said that I wasn't disappointed with Silent Hill F. I mean, it clearly wasn't the game that I wanted it to be or that I expected it to be, despite my disappointment for the game though, and I know this is a controversial thing to say, but I still really enjoyed Silent Hill F for what it was. The story, for example, was one of the more impactful stories of the entire series, only behind Silent Hill 2 in my opinion. The characters, especially the protagonist, Hanako, were some of the more complex characters of the series, and it was a great experience to learn about each of them and their motivations throughout the story. Also, the atmosphere, the environments, and the music of the game were pretty top notch for me, as all of these things worked really well together to create a unique experience thanks to the inspiration that the game took from Japanese culture. I know the game wasn't perfect, as things like the monster designs, combat, and puzzles really didn't live up to my expectations, but it was still a decent game, and while I don't see it as one of the best Silent Hill games out there, it's far better than some of the other entries of the series like Downpour and definitely Homecoming. Silent Hill F is a disturbing story that plays a lot with metaphorical meanings and leaves a lot of things up to your own interpretation, but it's this type of unique storytelling that really connected with me as a player. Say what you will about the gameplay, you can't deny that Silent Hill F attempted to take some risks by giving us a one-of-a-kind experience with Silent Hill F that felt like something completely different, even if it wasn't a complete home run in the end. I still really enjoyed the game for what it was, hence why it claims a spot in my top 10 horror games of the year. Number 7, A.I.L.A. A.I.L.A takes the first-person psychological horror genre and gives it a twist, and it's one that really makes A.I.L.A one of the best horror games of the year. The game centers around a game tester who is trying out a new virtual reality system called A.I.L.A. However, after starting up the program, Samuel, the main protagonist of the game, quickly realizes that A.I.L.A has access to things that she probably shouldn't have access to, and she uses it to create some truly terrifying experiences for Samuel. Because of the premise of the game, A.I.L.A is able to throw the player into multiple different subgenres of horror, from action horror to survival horror to medieval horror to psychological horror. There's really no limit in terms of the amount of subgenres you, the player, gets to experience in A.I.L.A. I also found the game absolutely terrifying, and it's not just because of the jump scares. There's a lot of moments in A.I.L.A that uses subtle or atmospheric tension to create scares, and it's these moments that really impress me the most. The combat in the game is a bit clunky, especially when you have to use melee weapons in certain sections of the game, like the medieval world. However, the story was one that I found myself invested in, especially when exploring the backstory of Samuel, the protagonist of the game, and the terrifying AI herself, A.I.L.A. No spoilers, of course, but let's just say that A.I.L.A is already inside of your head and Samuel's head the moment you are introduced to her, and man, it is a mind-blowing experience. Side note, my fear of mannequins has only grown because of this game. Just saying. Thanks, A.I.L.A. Number 6, Dying Light the Beast. If you're a fan of the first two Dying Light games, then there's not really much I need to say about this game to explain to you why Dying Light the Beast is one of the best action horror games of the year. Everything you loved about the first two games, especially that first game, is present here. Using parkour to traverse your way across a beautiful city is still as fun and as exciting as it sounds. The unique weapons and tools that you can craft to destroy zombies still feels fresh and satisfying with each zombie head you decapitate. The badass soundtrack that gives you chills and gets you hyped as you're going on a massive zombie massacre spree just never gets old. And most importantly, nighttime is still absolutely terrifying as you'll find yourself with a limited light source as you make your way through a dark town with the infamous volatiles, aka super zombies basically, chasing you through the streets as you race towards the nearest safe house to avoid getting your ass handed to you. Yeah, it's as simple as this. If you like the first two games, you'll like this one. Well, except that there is one notable change in the core gameplay of Dying Light the Beast, and it's actually in the name, the Beast. See, the story revolves around Kyle Crane, protagonist of the first game that has been experimented on and now has super zombie powers. These powers allow him to basically Hulk out and kick major ass, adding a new layer of the traditional Dying Light gameplay experience. The boss fights are the key to upgrading this new feature, as you'll encounter some other lab rats gone wrong, with each one having a unique ability of their own. From turning invisible to being super strong, each test subject has an ability of their own that makes them somewhat unique. And when you defeat them, you can take their blood, and that will give you new abilities as well, like swinging across town like you're fucking Spider-Man. Yeah, I love Dying Light the Beast, but that's mostly because I really like the first game. So if you are someone that like and enjoy the previous games, I highly doubt you'll dislike this one, as you might even like this one a tad bit more thanks to some of the new mechanics featured in Dying Light the Beast. Number 5, Total Chaos. Total Chaos was a horror game that quite honestly was not even on my radar until after it released. Then after seeing some of my friends play this game and talk it up, I just had to give it a shot, and man, am I glad I did. Not only did this game far exceed my expectations, but it also quickly became one of my favorite games of the year. I should start off by saying that Total Chaos is not the easiest game out there, by the way. It's a survival horror game with survival being the key word here, and it's a game that will test you over and over again, and you will fail over and over again. However, like Soulsborne games and other survival games, that's kind of the point. You need to learn from these mistakes and apply it to your playstyle after each death. There's really a lot that I enjoy about this game. For one, the focus on survival helps make Total Chaos feel completely different than other horror games that came out this year. Think Sons of the Forest, but on a much smaller and less complex level. You'll need to craft resources and weapons to take out all sorts of terrifying enemies. You also need to collect food, water, and healing items to keep the protagonist healthy throughout the game, or you'll receive consequences for failing to manage these stats. The enemy types in the game are pretty terrifying, but quite honestly, it's some of the boss fights that really intrigued me. For example, there's one creepy ass stalker enemy that chases you around in the dark while you're collecting fuses at one point, and man, did that part leave me with nightmares. There's other sections that feature these weird exploding ladies that instantly kill you if you get too close to them, but they only move towards you when you're not looking at them. Imagine the mannequins from Resident Evil Village, except for when they get close to you, they explode. All in all, Total Chaos is a fantastic psychological horror game, and it's one with a really interesting story and plot that I won't dare ruin for you guys, as I highly recommend you experience it for yourself if you haven't already. Number 4, routine. Something about sci-fi horror games that are set in the future, complete with an 80s retro view of what the future should look like, really hits the spot for me. Think Alien franchise. Since the series was established in the late 70s, early 80s, the futuristic technology in this universe has this retro-like vibe to it despite it being set in the future. Routine is a sci-fi horror game that takes that same inspiration and creates a unique experience from that premise. I can't really begin to describe how incredible Routine is and how I honestly believe it's one of the best sci-fi horror games I've ever played. The atmosphere and the setting of this lunar base is really terrifying. Despite the entire game being set in a single location, the areas in this space station all feel pretty different from each other. From an abandoned mall to the creepy crew quarters, each area adds something completely different from each other. And while combat should be avoided as much as possible since you can't actually completely kill most of the enemies of the game, the enemy types are absolutely horrifying. Whether it's the 80s inspired retro robots trying to end you or an alien creature that literally looks like it's crawled straight out of your worst nightmares. Routine is no slouch when it comes to scaring the hell out of us, the players. The game features a lot of challenging puzzles, something that I personally appreciate a lot of my horror games, and one of the most notable features of the game is this device called the Cat. Essentially, this is a multi-tool that you can use for all sorts of things, from powering down robots briefly to using as a blacklight to identify fingerprints on keypads. And honestly, there's something really cool and unique about how you use this device, as it requires you to look at it directly and change the features on the device itself as if you are personally in the game. Speaking of which, Routine features no HUD, which is another great mechanic that helps you feel like you're actually in this immersive world. Whether you are a fan of sci-fi horror or just games that scare the hell out of you, Routine is a must play for sure. Number 3, Echoes of the Living. Currently, Echoes of the Living is in early access, but even with that being the case, I still think this game is one of the best survival horror experiences of the entire genre, especially if you're a fan of old school survival horror like the original Resident Evil trilogy. In fact, Echoes of the Living takes a lot of inspiration from RE1 Remake and Resident Evil 2 OG specifically. Now, at the time of recording this video, only Liam's campaign is available, and there are still some bugs, including one that forces the player to use an autosave feature for about 2/3 of the game instead of the limited manual save method, which does suck, I'll admit. Yet, despite these setbacks, Echoes of the Living demonstrates exactly what you would want from a love letter to the classics. Even with only half the game complete right now, Liam's campaign took me roughly around 12 to 13 hours to complete. The fact that an indie survival horror game that's only halfway complete is that long is honestly already unbelievable, but there you have it. And it's actually really great quality. The combat feels almost identical to Resident Evil 1 Remake specifically. You have your traditional fixed camera angles complete with tank controls with a limited inventory screen that screams nostalgia every time you open it up. The puzzles are great too, as most of them require you to think outside of the box. And the setting is massive as you find yourself exploring so many different unique locations within this city, from a hospital to a pub to the sewers underneath the city. You really never get tired of exploring the streets of A.I.L.A City, and the best part is that there's clearly more areas coming for Laura's campaign, as you'll notice certain locked areas that you can't access as Liam. In terms of what Echoes of the Living does differently than the games it takes inspiration from, well, the biggest difference is probably weapon variety. Whereas old school survival horror games focus primarily on guns and sometimes counter weapons, Echoes of the Living appears to have no shortage of weapons for the player. Whether it's grenades or melee weapons, there's a lot more at your disposal than your traditional old school survival horror game. Also, the game feels longer than most old school survival horror games, and that's honestly a good thing. There's a lot more content here. Let's look at the main inspiration for this game, for example. Resident Evil 1 Remake takes about 10 hours or so to complete on your first playthrough of both campaigns. However, looking at Echoes of the Living, Liam's campaign alone took me about 12 to 14 hours to complete. Then there's Laura's campaign, which will be released at some point, and as teased in multiple parts in the game, I feel like there's going to be a lot of different puzzles and locations compared to Liam's campaign. So yeah, I imagine that's another 12 to 14 hours there. Then if the game sells well enough, this two-person development team also plans to release 2 additional stories for free, each around 6 hours of gameplay as well. So yeah, you're talking about nearly 40 hours of gameplay for an old school survival horror game created by 2 people. 2 people. That's unbelievable. And something like that, even if it's not fully complete at the time of recording this video, deserves some recognition as one of the best survival horror games of the year. Number 2, Cronos: The New Dawn. It's insane how much Bloober Team has changed in the last year in terms of the quality of their games. Don't get me wrong, Bloober Team were always one of the most notable developers of horror games since they hit the scene with Layers of Fear. However, until the release of Silent Hill 2 Remake last year, they were always viewed as a development team that delivered on immersive storytelling, but not much in terms of gameplay. Well, Bloober Team does it once again with their newest and quite honestly their best original IP yet, Cronos: The New Dawn. Taking heavy inspiration from Dead Space, Cronos is an action survival sci-fi horror game game. Set in the future in which the human race has come close to extinction, you play as the traveler that time travels in search of what created the calamity and who searches to find the key to stopping it. Along the way, you have to battle zombie-like alien creatures that come in all forms and sizes. The most unique thing about the enemy types in this game is the fact that they like to merge with each other. See these creatures, known as orphans, look for other corpses, and when they find them, they merge with them essentially to make them more powerful than they were before. This creates some urgency during your time with Cronos, as each time you see them merging, you want to stop them as soon as possible. The merging is a key component of Cronos, as the game already challenges you by giving you limited resources, and I mean it gives you very limited resources, meaning if you let the orphans merge too much, you're not going to have enough resources to deal with them, and eventually you'll find yourself with no way to defend yourself against these super alien zombies. And yeah, that's happened to me a lot, trust me. Speaking of which, you can't have a great action horror game without a unique arsenal to make killing enemies fun, now can you? In the case of Cronos, you have all sorts of resources at your disposal. From your standard gun that gains new parts that allows it to act as a shotgun or machine gun, complete with a really useful charge mechanic, to additional resources like torches that help incinerate orphans and destroy their corpses, preventing them from being used by other orphans to merge. Cronos the New Dawn has no shortage of ways to kill these alien creatures. And yeah, it's easily one of the best games of the year period, and it's a damn shame that it really didn't get much recognition at the Game Awards, to be honest. Sure, it's not as scary as Bloober Team's last game, Silent Hill 2 Remake, but it does make up for that with its highly addicting combat system, enemy types, and boss fights that keeps you invested in the game from start to finish. Before we take a look at the game that claimed the #1 spot for best horror game of 2025, it's worth mentioning that there are a ton of fantastic horror games that released this year that I think all deserve a shout out. So here's a few honorable mentions that honestly just barely missed out on my top 10 best horror games of 2025.
How can you distinguish between what is real and what isn't? Do you trust what you see? What you hear? What happens when everything starts to feel wrong? To seem fake?
Number 1, Tormented Souls 2. As a fan of classic survival horror games, and as someone that saw the original Tormented Souls as the best indie survival horror game of all time, clearly my expectations for Tormented Souls 2 were through the roof. The game had a lot to live up to, and quite honestly, I was concerned that my expectations were going to overhype this game, and eventually I would be disappointed with it. Thankfully, I couldn't have been more wrong about that. Tormented Souls 2 is a love letter to classic survival horror games, like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, but it also builds upon that formula that allows it to really create its own unique identity. This was the case for the first game as well, but I'd argue there were some issues with that original game. For one, the boss fights. There were little to no boss fights in that original game. Tormented Souls 2, on the other hand, fixes that issue as it adds multiple boss fights, each with their own unique way of defeating them. Another issue that I had with the first game was the fact that the acting and dialogue in the game felt like AI generated content, honestly. Thankfully, this issue is also addressed in the second game. Don't get me wrong, the acting and dialogue is still far from perfect, but at least it's not the same that we got in the first game. Tormented Souls 2 also expanded the story and gameplay experience, almost doubling the time to complete with multiple locations to explore instead of a single building like the first game. You'll get to explore a school, a church, a mall, and other unique areas, each adding something new to the experience. The enemy types are even more horrifying in the sequel, and surprisingly, for an indie game with fixed camera angles, it's quite scary. I can't tell you how many times I found myself jumping because of the environment, atmosphere, or even the sound design of the game, let alone the creepy monsters. When it comes to the gameplay of Tormented Souls 2, it feels very similar to the first game, with improvements made to combat, puzzles, and visuals. You have more resources and weapons to use this time around. There are of course more puzzles, and in some cases more difficult than the first game, and everything just looks so much better thanks to it using Unreal Engine 5 instead of the Unity engine. Tormented Souls 2 wasn't perfect though, with some players having game-breaking glitches or bugs seen in cutscenes throughout their experience when the game first launched. I myself ran into one major glitch, but I definitely saw a lot of people having more issues with experiencing the game for the first time. However, over time, a lot of the bugs were fixed, at least on my end from my last playthrough of the game early this month, and ultimately Tormented Souls 2 turned out to be not only one of the best love letters to classic survival horror games, but honestly it's claimed the title of best indie survival horror game of all time for me. Well, at least until Echoes of the Living is fully patched and complete and potentially takes that title away. But yeah, that does it for this episode of Nerdspace Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think of my list. Is Tormented Souls 2 the best horror game of the year, or do you think a different horror game deserves that title? Also, what horror game do you think deserved a spot in the top 10 best horror games of the year that didn't crack my list? Let me know your thoughts down below. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more survival horror content. Also, leave a like on today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerdspace Games. Take care.